Okay, moving right ahead. Next up is Aran's data privacy update. And the speaker is me. Oh, wow, cool. There's a lot of attention being put on personal data privacy globally. It's worthwhile activity. We've seen discussions taking place in many countries, but probably the most significant example would be the EU General Data Protection Regulation taking effect next month. Certainly has launched quite a bit of activity, particularly because of the sort of pervasive, wide open nature of the internet and the very clear guidance out of GDPR regarding the handling of personal data and the rights of EU residents. So with that happening, and with the fact that we hadn't really looked at our privacy policy in a while, we just finished undertaking a pretty serious review of our data privacy practices. And our approach to data privacy is based on our mission, what we're here to do, the purpose that we fulfill, and the application of relevant law and regulation to that. So I have to talk a little bit about both of those. Aran is the regional internet registry that serves the Internet Numbers Registry System for North America. There's a system called the Internet Numbers Registry System. It's the collective pool of V4, V6, ASN, 32 and 64 address pools, and 5 RIRs end up administering portions of that. We handle the North America region, as folks are aware. And that's our principal mission. And it's very important for us to pay attention to that. That system exists for a purpose. It's essential to internet operations globally. It provides unique number of resources for organizations globally in order that they can be part of the internet or serve customers with internet services. It's used for relevant contacts for troubleshooting, abuse mitigation, law enforcement. It serves a public interest in this manner. The internet is a wonderful benefit for all of us, but we have to keep it running. And the Internet Number Registry System is a very important part of that. We actually have dealt with personal data privacy before. The community is not unaware of that. When we did adopt policies that would put potentially personal data and expose it, for example, when we were looking down at subdelegations and subdelegations of ISPs down to the individual broadband subscriber, we adopted a residential privacy policy to make sure that those could be omitted and left out of the registry so they wouldn't be visible. We have interest in supporting the public use of the data, but at the same time, we have to pay attention to the privacy concerns, and we've shown a track record of doing this. So now we talk about GDPR. GDPR applies to the processing of personal data by businesses established in the EU. We're not established, Aran, in the EU. As it turns out, you'd have to have offices, employees, some nexus of business there, and we just don't meet the definition. But GDPR actually applies to a lot more companies than just ones established. It also applies to those who process personal data that offer goods and services to individuals in the EU or monitor EU individuals. If you hold yourself out providing services to citizens of the EU or residents of the EU, you have to be prepared to be covered by GDPR because you're actively soliciting EU residents to engage with your business. The quid pro quo is that you respect the fact that those citizens have rights and they have certain laws that cover them. It's not our practice, really, to offer goods or solicit services from EU residents. We don't actively do it. It is possible for someone to make use of our services, but we don't go looking for them. We don't advertise there. Our service area doesn't overlap. We don't engage in practices there. So someone from the EU who's making use of Aran services, they're consciously seeking us out. We're not trying. We're not prohibiting them, obviously. I see a number of fine EU residents in the audience, but we don't actively solicit there. And as such, we don't meet the definition that the GDPR requires for a business that's actively engaging in the delivery of goods and services to EU residents. So our general scope of activities, of our operational activities, do not fall within the GDPR, which is convenient. Now, it turns out, even if it doesn't, we'd like to have better personal privacy practices. And the personal privacy practices are just responsible because people do get harmed when their personal data gets out there and they're unaware of it. There are people who are, for very legitimate reasons, very personal reasons, don't want to be public. You may have someone who doesn't like you and is trying to hunt you down. You may have a reason because you have arrangements, personal arrangements that you don't want the public to know. And so it shouldn't be necessary for you to become a public persona in general to deal with Aran. And we look at that very seriously. While we're not covered by GDPR, many of the principles that are in GDPR, we actually support very similar principles. So we actually said, well, let's actually put down in writing what we do support. So these are Aran's personal data privacy principles. We obtain personal data only for specific lawful purposes and by consent of the individual. We're not looking to obtain your personal data unless we've got a reason to obtain it and we have your consent. We store personal data with appropriate protections for its integrity and confidentiality. We don't treat your personal data, your name, your phone number, your email address, we don't treat it capriciously or lax or with less security than we treat our own personal data. We store it for as long as necessary for the purpose in which it's obtained. This turns out to be challenging for most of Aran's purposes, and we'll talk about that. We'll use reasonable efforts to process requests from individuals whose correction or deletion where feasible. Now, we actually try to do this today. We're actually trying to create business processes to make it more available, but it is challenging because of the nature of the business we're in. And then we'll direct any agents or contractors to adhere to these or equivalent privacy policies. We use a lot of third-party services, CVent for registration for the meeting, polling software, for example, for voting, election software. And when we use these services, we engage with these people to make sure they have similar privacy practices. So we put these principles down, and then we went out and looked at the Aran privacy statement on the website and realized that no one had looked at the Aran privacy statement on the website for almost a decade. And so we started over and wrote a very clear privacy policy, and it's now on the website. It's version 3, the old one was 2. It describes the scope of the policy. It has these principles enshrined in it. It has the information we collect and receive. It says what we collect from you and why, how we use and share that. It talks a little bit about how we retain data. It talks about the correction and deletion. It talks about website usage and tracking, because apparently a lot of people worry about that with websites, so we had to say a little about that. It talks about children's privacy rights. I won't get into that, but we don't hold out our services for children either. And so if you know of a young child who's putting their personal data in our systems, we'd like to know about it. So that's what's in the whole policy. Let's talk about some specifics. Personal data. Okay, so what's personal data? If I can use an identifier and I can figure out who you are, it's probably personal data, if I can do it without any other information. So your given name, your postal address, your phone number, your fax numbers, your email addresses. A business address is not personal information. If you're a business of one, I'm really sorry, you're a business before you're a person. You held yourself out to be a business, congratulations. So I don't no longer consider you personal data because you have decided to hold yourself out as a business. We collect personal data when you supply it to our websites, our systems, or otherwise interact with us. You call us up, you fill out a survey, you use the Aran Help Desk. That's personal data. We don't try to collect it, but sometimes we have to. Meeting registration, we have to know who you are. By definition, that's your name. It's printed on your badge, okay? It's personal data. So we're going to collect personal data from you. A lot of Aran's services, this is in the policy, very clear, are public. We have a public policy process. The nature of that public policy process requires a record. The record is public. There is a person over here doing a transcript. When you speak at the mic and you say, I'm Owen DeLong, they record your name. Oh, okay, yeah. They record your name. And so it's in the transcript. When you raise your hand for a show of hands, you're participating in a poll that's going to affect our policy process. There are many people who want to know who might have been in that room raising their hands. So you're part of the attendee list, which is public. These records are saved because they affect our policies. And so we maintain a public archive of all of this, and it's necessary for the integrity of our policy process. So you have to decide, am I willing to be a participant in an Aran meeting? Am I willing to know my name will be recorded as a participant? If I speak, I'll be recorded as a participant. I will be in the audio, in the video, and in the transcript. You might not want to. You can participate remotely and not register, by the way. The video's right there. You just can't ask questions or participate in the show of hands, but you can see the audio. But if you actually want to participate, whether it's on-site or remotely, yes, we're going to have your information, and we're going to record it because of the integrity of our policy process. So you have choices, and you have a decision to make. If you do decide to participate, though, recognize it is Aran's position that this is public information that we will store and that we will keep publicly. Organizational data. This is mostly what we get. In the normal course of business, people provide us organizational data, street address, organization name, contact information, who their business is. And they give us the names of their employees, which is personal data. We're not trying to collect personal data. You can put Network Operations Center in there. You can put Billing Department. We have a lot of people who do that. If you put the name of an employee in there, you need to get their consent. Now, it's possible you have their consent. You may believe that the fact that you're paying them a paycheck means you have their consent to use their information. I don't know. I actually don't even know in what countries that's legal or not. I actually don't care, as it turns out, either, because you're responsible for getting the employee's consent if you're providing that data. Organizations that provide personal data of their employees, their customers, their staff, to Aran are responsible for being sure they can do that and for maintaining that. That is not our job. We have a lot of things to do. That's not one of them. Other organizational information, things we associate with you is considered organizational information. It's not personal, it's organizational. It includes the list of resources and things like that. Now, when we publish this registry, it's a public registry. We believe that the list of number resources in the Internet Number Registry System is something that has to be public. It's something that is for the integrity of the system. And so you have to realize when you go and get someone's consent, one of your employees or customers, to put them in who is, you have to tell them this is a public registry for blocks of IP addresses assigned to organizations. And we have made that determination, and now people have to make the determination of whether they wish to be using the Internet Number Registry System. That's it. It's actually not that hard. You can go read it on the website. Happy to take questions.
Ron De Silva, ICANN, Board of Directors. Thanks, John. Appreciate the update. I realize the RIRs from time to time will share best practices, and I'm curious if this set of principles and policies around privacy data for Aran has been shared with the other RIRs, and have you done sort of a mashup on who's got what policies and how they differ and where that sits? Thanks.
So, interestingly enough, if you run all the way back here, do I actually have a laser pointer? This might be the first time I use it. Go for that button. Oh, look at that. Okay, I have a laser pointer. If you go all the way back here to the Internet Number Registry System is essential to Internet operations globally. There are other RIRs who have looked at the GDPR issue, who have very similar statements. I would not say they're the same words, because I would never use someone else's words, but they're really similar. Each RIR is looking at this. If we get to the point where there's harmonization across all 5, then we might do something to globally state as much. There is a pretty important difference here, though, because recognize that we've never been trying to give IP address blocks out to individuals. It's recognized that this is for network operations for purposes of organizations. Even in a small organization, we're giving a block of numbers for them to number multiple computers or multiple customers. So the IP Whois has from day one not been about information that's supposed to be associated with an individual. It's always been an organization, even if we have put names in it and maintained it that way. That's why years ago, Aran, when we were cleaning up the database, we actually formalized the organization field, which wasn't even actually clearly called out in the original IP address records. So the short version is we have a couple of RIRs that have made this statement. We are not yet through all the RIRs looking at their privacy practices, but certainly we'll try to do some sort of compare and harmonization when everyone gets through their first phase. Yes, remote?
Jason Schiller. Do you have a defined wipeout policy to remove data from systems once the data is no longer needed?
Good question. So for the public policy process, we maintain a record of the transcripts and the polls, the whole meeting event for the history of the policy process, so the history of the NRPM. As long as we have an NRPM, people will be able to go back and see how it was created, and that includes these meetings, the attendees. So that has to have a very long lifetime. For purposes of the registry, and this actually, a lot of this is in the privacy policy called out as examples. For purposes of the Internet Number Registry, we have a similar circumstance. Because of the integrity of the registry, we have to keep all the data that supports the assignments and reallocations and all of the changes made. We keep it for the lifetime of the registry. This means that, yes, we have records that go back to the very beginning. In fact, in Aran's case, our records go back pre-Aran because we inherited the intranet records, which were John Postel's records. We have to keep those forever. Regarding what's public, that's a different question. And we will work very hard to figure out information that doesn't have to be public. You're going to see a presentation right after me talking about that very topic. So the answer is yes, we will look at the duration of the business purpose, and for information that we do not need, we will delete it. However, because of the integrity of the registry and the policy process, the retention from many of our records is permanent, indefinite. Yes, Kevin.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. So I appreciate you updating significantly the privacy policy for Aran as the corporation. My concern is that the community and the NRPM does not necessarily have any of these aspects in it. In fact, we want this information. We want you to put your Whois information. We want the reassignment information. And I think that we're stale as a community in regards to the global privacy requirements today and the expectations of individuals who, even if they're working for a corporation, those individuals. So as a community, I'm concerned that our NRPM needs work, that we need to make a better attempt. While I understand that we can do role accounts for reassignments instead of individuals, I would suspect that the vast majority are individuals, and I think it's, I don't think it's fair to say that there has been 100% consent down the road, because this has been done over many years where it just wasn't a requirement, John.
Right.
So I think that the community needs to be very, very aware of that. My other question is, how do you deal with, and that was more of a statement than a question, but as a question, how do you deal with requests for personal information, i.e., I would like to know where my personal information is within Aran. Is that something that is doable by Aran? I might be a bad example, but...
You actually gave a great example. Okay, so just think about a different question. Let's say you don't ask, where's my data in Aran? Let's say you ask, delete my data that's in Aran. That's a very similar request, as it turns out, because it's hard to delete something you don't know where it occurred. Okay? So it turns out they're related. We did not, in our privacy principles, in their final form, we did not commit to being able to provide you a copy of all your data. It turns out that that's a something that a lot of people want, but it turns out to be for an organization that has 15 years of records that haven't been built that way and records prior that haven't been built that way. If you got an assignment in 1994, I do have it in a record somewhere, but I'm not sure I have it indexed in a way that will let me find it, so I can't commit to giving you the data necessarily. For the information we can delete, it's a much smaller subset. For example, early registry records internally, we're not going to delete even if you asked us to, because we can't. We need that record in case we need to verify the integrity of the chain of custody in the future. So we looked at both delete all my data and find all my data. We can't do find all our data right now. We looked at the requirements, and literally it would require reorganizing how Aran has done its systems over the year. So the answer is, no, we cannot provide that. We will handle a request for deletion for the stuff that we know on a best effort basis, as a reasonable efforts basis. Where's Michael? Michael should be throwing something at me. On a reasonable efforts basis. And we will handle requests for updating if you have an inaccuracy that you've seen. The best we can, we'll do it. Both of those are part of the compliance email and the policy update. I want to go back to an earlier point you said about the NRPM. Yes, the NRPM should spell out the community's expectations much better with regard to when you do a reassignment, what's expected, or when you do an allocation, what's expected for that matter. And if you know someone on the Aran AC, you might get a hold of them and talk to them, and maybe they can come up with a proposal for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Microphones remain open.
Yeah, hi, Luceries van der Laan, ICANN board. So, as you probably know, there's a big discussion within ICANN about how to comply with GDPR, and it's a little bit more complex because obviously there's a lot more European data subjects involved. And this European law is going to have global reach. So, to what extent is Aran following the debate within ICANN on this and looking at the various models that have been proposed? Are there some which you have special observations about or preferences for, and is there a way in which what's going to happen with the who is there is going to impact your ability to do your work?
So it's my obligation to follow those discussions, and I have been at a level that's probably more detailed than anyone would really want to know. As we had a discussion, example, the difference between GDPR and the police directive, which is the partner regulation to GDPR for access by law enforcement to data. I'm tracking all of it because we have to. We just have to know how that would apply. We also have the potential, if someone were to tell Aran, oh, you should hold out services to people in the UK or people in France, I would suddenly have to make all the changes to be not what looks to be similar, but to actually be verbatim compliant with GDPR. So we have to know what the differences are at any given moment. So we are tracking it. Regarding the particulars at ICANN and the interim model and the various proposals and the Working Group 29 commissioners' feedback, yes, we're tracking it. It should not impact Aran unless someone makes the strange observation that blocks of network identifiers that are assigned to businesses for keeping the internet running are somehow like domain names that are being used for branding globally. I can understand how the name that's used in an email, a name that's used on a brand or a billboard, and is meant to be something communicated, and in many cases people use as their personal identifier. I could see how that would be considered personal data in some cases. I don't understand how a block of IP addresses should be considered. So I see DNS whois and IP whois as very different creatures. However, we're both internet organizations. They're both called whois. You cannot prevent stupidity. And so there may be some that we have to respond to entirely because people want to paste things with the same color paint. And if so, I'll respond. I usually don't have a problem with a lack of words in such cases. Okay, more questions? Okay. Please take a moment, go read the Aran privacy policy. You can find it on the web. If you go to the Aran website on any page and go to the bottom, it's right there. It's called privacy policy. Please let us know if you have any comments, concerns. We are open to revisions, obviously, if someone sees something that needs to be changed or something that you believe is otherwise. We're also trying to elaborate the business processes that support this, and in the process of doing that, we may either issue more detailed information, or we may end up with changes that result because it turns out it's hard to implement in the business. So this policy is operative, however. The new policy is operative right now. If you do send us a request to delete your data, expect it's going to take a while because we haven't backed that up with anything other than manual processes for now. But we're working on it as we go forward. That's it. Thank you.